Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Welcome, friends. We're really happy to bring this event to you. We're really happy for the speakers we have. I'm very excited about them. I've interacted with a number of them across the last few years of my journey in crypto law. We have the great pleasure of having a great sponsor, a number of sponsors in...
Yeah, a huge thank you to all of our sponsors, which are MetaCartel, Brown Redneck, Unlock, and LexDAO, of course.
Yeah, and also thanks to Gitcoin for allowing us to use this space gratis, and we also thank you all for respecting that. I know it was kind of annoying to have to get in between 1 and 1:30, the shoes off, but it is a neighborhood area, and they offered us the venue for free. We were very happy to have it, and it's actually very nice to have kind of a close group here. So thank you again. And I'll go ahead if you want to introduce the two speakers, or I'm happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nick's going to kick off intro, the state of the DAOs. We have Victor Rortvedt from MCV and Hydra, and Sky Minert from MetaCartel and DXDao.
You guys can hop up, and while you're sitting down, I'll let everybody know. Our schedule was more or less set up into 2 30-minute panels, a 15-minute break, and then 2 more 30-minute panels, and then another break. The breaks are at 2:30 for a coffee break and 3:45. All right, welcome guys. Victor, Sky. So we have you up here just to talk a little bit about what the state of the DAO is, maybe a little brief history of how it's come to where it is, but really what's interesting you in the DAO space, somewhat in the DAO legal space, but really just in the expansive use of DAOs.
Sure, I'll start. So yeah, I think it's a great time for DAOs, but I think we're generally in a space where we're kind of past the naive era of DAOs. And I think there's a number of kind of sacrifices that have been made based on the kind of earliest conception of what DAOs could be, where you'd have this monolithic smart contract architecture that would operate on Homo economicus to, achieve these goals of utopian design without any kind of change, and you'd be allowed to have anon token holders govern it, and all the emergent governance would come together. And, there are numerous examples of how that pattern failed and needed to be redesigned. And so you see a lot of kind of either new DAOs or reconfigured DAOs that are trying to narrow and I think bring us back to things that are a little bit more traditional as far as how organizations work. So you see the move towards, automatic delegation inside of how ENS worked, where you kind of get everybody to sign on to a consensus kind of, series of constitutional prospects, and then give, power to the delegates, looking at how things like Optimism are using the badge holders for retroactive public goods funding. These are all sort of returning back to more, sources of leadership, centralization. And so I think that's one of the things that's happening, and it's kind of good because the DAOs that are surviving are making changes that move away from sort of idealism to much more practical capability, and they're getting there slowly and surely. And the other thing that's there that I think makes this kind of difficult to speak about is that, much like crypto in general, the different verticals and the styles of the subject matters in crypto, and then the types of DAOs and what they're attempting to do, have really differentiated to the point that there is not really generalizably great best practices that work across different types of DAOs. So a protocol DAO that's supposed to exist in perpetuity has an incredibly different set of incentives and incredibly different set of challenges that lead to much different patterns than an investment DAO that is, set to wind up after deploying, a certain number of capital that was accumulated. And so in my experience, which is on the investment DAO community, first community-led investment DAOs that are much smaller, sub-Dunbar's number, known members that are doxed to each other. There's a lot of things that we feel like we've improved that model with the sort of culture that's built around that, the legal stack, the operational stack. And yet, whenever I talk to people and get really deep into a conversation about DAOs, and then I realize they really care about, a protocol DAO, much of my advice is absolutely, not salient there. So the differentiation of the different types of DAOs, I think, is something that now requires specialization inside of each kind of model rather than a DAO expert in general. So that's my take.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Victor and I have both been in DAOs probably for 4 or 5 years now. And you will hear in the last probably year, like some people will say DAOs, didn't work, DAOs are dying, like DAOs have gone away. We've been through this cycle, as Victor mentioned, and I still think DAOs are here. Like DAOs are managing the most money they've probably ever managed. There's big protocol DAOs, but the way ICOs like showed the power of crowdfunding capital or money for like new ideas, which kind of got rug pulled and things. DAOs allow like crowdfunding coordination, and that can be like 3-person DAOs with a multi-sig around a small micro idea, or that can be giant protocol DAOs in the DeFi space that are owning world-changing protocols and also massive treasuries and tokens and things. And there's all different types. Yeah, and then I like the fact the experimentation across all these different types of DAOs is happening. There's DAOs with no legal entities, like some of these giant protocol DAOs basically can't have legal entities, like Uniswap token DAO that owns a protocol. And then there's smaller ones that we've had some panels over the last couple summers about legal discussions in DAOs, and there's ones that have single legal entities, there's ones that have multiple legal entities, there's ones in all different jurisdictions. I'm pretty excited about like seeing how the Colorado cooperative ones play out. There's maybe 5 or 6 projects that are all using the Colorado cooperative, and we're here in Colorado, and it has this framework for making a DAO using that framework. We haven't yet seen, so I just met a new one. Coinage is using the same mechanism, which is a media property. And there's Collabland, there's Opolis, and there's SporkDAO actually. And I'm excited to see things like the continuation of these DAOs. So like actually maybe some of these DAOs end up making money and start paying out to the members of their cooperative. And that's still yet untested. So I think in Colorado it's okay, but I'm interested to see how like the US government might look at that when this cooperative starts paying out their token holders. And so we have all this different experimentation. We have things like this shirt is for Yeeter is a new product, and it basically took the cool things about ICO crowdfunding and then combined it with the power of a DAO and put it together so you can actually ape into a DAO, throw money at an idea, but the people that get that money can't rug pull you and just take the money and disappear, because the money goes into a DAO and you become part of that DAO. And so that's not a crazy idea. It's a new idea. It's now very easy to do. You can go use that product. And so that's an example of taking the things we've learned over the last few years and like making the solution that we actually need. And then the other cool thing, most of the DAOs that I think we've been in are not liquid token governance DAOs. So there's a lot of DAOs where liquid token governance is the control of the whole DAO. But that really means that with a lot of money, you can just go take over a DAO. And so it became more popular when Vitalik wrote the paper on soulbound tokens. But a lot of our DAOs, share-based DAOs and Moloch DAOs, DXDAO is using DAOstack's reputation system. And now you have NFT badge holders with Optimism stuff. So we're iterating on what types of DAOs we have, because plain liquid token governance DAOs, there's a lot of problems with them. And so other ways, and Pockets here actually, who's putting the two things together, I think allowing your liquid token capital providers plus the people that are contributing and building the project all to govern a DAO together is like the answer. We don't have the perfect system for it yet, but I think it's all going to move in that direction.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of working off what you guys were talking about, as you see DAOs proliferating and diversifying and going into new areas, restructuring, where do you see those best practices develop? Are there branches or categories? What kind of DAO service organizations, or where can DAOs reach out to service or find resources to then work on those best practices together, or get to a place where it's a little less of a dark forest?
Yeah, I think there are some very interesting things that are kind of adjacent, support and service related, either companies or DAOs themselves that are emerging. There's one that we work with Hydra Ventures called Thing3. These are essentially crypto build professionals, legal, accountant, other types of sort of service providers that decided they wanted to have upside in the companies they were advising, and so they sort of perform work on a multi-year contract basis in exchange for a share of the DAO's equity. And so the notion of bringing in people from different sort of professions and bringing them in is a very exciting one, and figuring out what the right balance between, paying people sort of out of pocket versus, when you make a exchange or a equity deal with folks is something that people are, I think, looking at different experimental forms for. And so, yeah, the service DAO model is exciting. I think that yeah, sorry, I think I lost my train of thought there, so let me pass it to Seth.
Yeah, and related to, so the thing three, which he mentioned, is this DAO or service DAO that can service many different DAOs, and more the big, especially the big protocol DAOs like Arbitrum and Optimism and things. You're seeing companies, so rather than individual contributors, you're seeing small sets of companies, whether that's for operations, whether that's for running grants programs, whether that's for a dev shop that can build things that the DAO needs. You're seeing more small groups of people basically self-organizing, either as a DAO or a small little company, to provide things that DAOs actually need, and they're either getting paid, often through ecosystem grants, but now there's the whole retroactive, Optimism has been calling it retroactive public goods funding, but I think it's more like network goods funding. Like if you're contributing value to the Optimism ecosystem, you can actually earn quite a bit of money. I mean, they just gave out in December, and now it's being streamed right now, $130 million to people that in the last year have been contributing value to their ecosystem, which most of it's public goods, but not all of it. And so the fact that exists now, people are building frameworks and tools to allow investors to support teams that are going to build into that space that are servicing DAOs. And then there's just more reason for you to be like, I know I don't have funding right now, but I'm just going to create value for this ecosystem, and I hope I get paid. And if you actually create value, you will get paid. And so that's a new dynamic that's really cool.
Yeah, and LexDAO got plenty of OP RPGF funding, and we're very thankful for that. And I think it is going to a public good, and we're very much in support of that. I'm very thankful.
Oh yeah, just to add to that, so the retroactive, unlike pre-permission grants, I guess retroactive funding is effectively revenue for like past value already created, and so you could theoretically just take that money and pay everyone that helped make that happen, and that will happen partially, but I think we'll see very quickly this $120 million, a lot of that money will get reinvested back into the ecosystem which provided it. And then that's going to boost that ecosystem, and then they have even more money and that creates a cycle. And Optimism's leading that, but I think Gitcoin and ENS and Arbitrum and many other ecosystem DAOs will probably assume that approach, or at least as part of their programs as well.
Yeah. And somewhat similar to the last question, but maybe in a little different light. As I saw it, a lot of liquid token DAOs and venture-backed DAOs through liquid token governance provided a lot of leadership in the area of ICO and following as to what DAOs can be, what DAOs can provide, how to make DAOs. Is that leadership coming from elsewhere now? Are there beacons of hope of that leadership? Is it in, OP RPGF? Is it Fractal? Or is it individual DAO leaders? And how do you support that?
So I think one of the things that's nice is that people learn from each other really quickly in the space. And so I think that sometimes that comes from, somebody being successful in a DAO, raising their profile. They're able to use, communication platforms and panels and things to teach other people what they know. I do think that it's quite different from that ICO phase of things, where you had, just massive amounts of money and massive amounts of participants, and it was a much more anarchical thing to sort of marshal, and they had to have kind of a centralized thing. Whereas I think more sustainable DAOs are able to kind of like sense their communities, sense where the sort of borders and cultural values are coming from, and then sort of construct leadership that creates legitimacy within that organization. So I think it's a little bit of a different process where it doesn't kind of come from almost like a pitch deck founder mindset of creating the whole thing from the start and people just sign up, but that it's more participatory. And I think that one of the things that's really valuable and useful now is not just the leadership models and the best practices, but also just the tooling stack has gotten mature to the point where everybody is basically comfortable with things like a Gnosis safe. They're familiar with the interface. They've been battle tested for however many years with however many billions of dollars that are there. Things like Snapshot, the modular aspect of how you can pick up and use these tools, and that lots and lots of people in the community are familiar with them, so that even if a new group of folks want to form a DAO, they can very quickly learn a good recommendation. So you don't have to spend so many cycles thinking about, how are we actually going to hold our money in this thing, and how do we process transactions, and how do we conduct votes that feel fair, and we're using custom new tools that are either monolithic and hard to understand, and they don't do what we want. So I think that really takes a lot of the administrative debt out of it, or the administrative overhead. And so the DAOs are able to focus, I think the ones that are doing well, on really just focusing on what feels legitimate and what is the culture that they're trying to build. And they don't spend as much time, I think, fetishizing the code and, spending all this time on some sort of optimized, deployed smart contract as the savior for a DAO.
Yeah, in terms of tools, well, a few things I learned over the last 4 years is, these are the three things that I came away with from 4 years of DAO work. You need a very clear mission that a bunch of people care about and want to be a part of that. Without that, your DAO's not going to do anything. And without a CEO, you have this collective that makes the big decisions. Collectives are not great at making hard decisions. They kind of make the average stuff. So DAOs DAOs have been really bad at, and they're getting better at delegation. So you delegate decision making, where HATS protocol and other things are allowing that to happen easier, where roles, clear delegations. But once you have delegation, in order to make quicker decisions with access, power and stuff, you need, the other most important thing is evaluation. So delegation without evaluation is pointless. And so now we have other tools like Karma Gap and other ones where we can better evaluate as a collective and coordinate. And I'm naming a bunch of tools, but these are basically addressing delegation and evaluation. You put those two things together, and then a collective, and then it gets the brain power of everyone rather than one CEO. If you put that all together, we think that some of those DAOs will outperform centralized entities, I think.
One final question, and then I'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. We'll talk a little bit about business orgs, but also about AI and network states in the upcoming panels. Is there a very bright future in any of those to you? Or is there any specific part of the future of DAOs that you have anything that you're enthusiastic about?
Yeah, I'd say the business org case is very fruitful. I think the notion is that you're trying to essentially accentuate and extend human collaboration, right? And DAOs don't just have to be obviously for people that are in one particular space in crypto and this kind of thing. And so, I'm always hesitant to think that we're ready to share this with other people yet. I think that we're still in a very fruitful discovery period, and we're making useful mistakes and innovating off of those. But the notion of extending other existing business forms do allow a lot of upsides, not only just with the reduction in the kinds of costs of treasury management and worries about embezzlement and this kind of thing, that smart contracts can help eradicate that and increase trust and transparency, but that you also have the notion of just asynchronous collaboration and the patterns that DAOs are learning about when you're working with people from all around the world that are awake at different times, and the balance between sync and async collaboration is something that I think is going to help businesses in general going forward, rather than the sort of, we're going to choose where to locate ourselves and we're going to bring in the people, we're all going to be in the same office and awake working at the same time. So I think that's got a lot of prospect. AI is one that I don't think I have a hot take that's anything beyond what I'm sure the panel's got ahead, but it's obviously going to be transformative. It's going to give DAOs much more insight into themselves, but it also, I think, risks undermining the social glue that happens, right? If there's too much deference to some other collaborative sense-making or synthesis of things, and then a recommendation to, let's say, do this investment or follow this particular protocol design suggestion, you risk that essentially people are losing the social consensus and the thing that keeps the community caring about each other, and it's just sort of an outsourcing, and I no longer have to care about this. And that's, I think, one thing that we'll have to think about, whether that's going to make DAOs more effective if they lose the sort of social components to them.
Yeah, rather than AI, I think it's easier to talk about a decentralized science example. DeSci makes a ton of sense for DAOs. Like crowdfund a few guys in a laboratory to have some money to test an early idea that was being unfunded and untested. It was only being funded by either an institution, like a university or a government, I guess, but allow people to crowdfund that, actually own the IP of that initial idea, share it open with everyone. So it's all worked in the open, but it's documented who created that idea, let people build upon it in an open, kind of open source type environment in the science world, and then have some exit to either, it's hard to produce it, so eventually it gets sold to like a big pharmaceutical company to produce or whatever, but that's like a perfect example of bringing DAO coordination and money to a real world vertical that was basically impossible 4 years ago. Yeah.
And maybe retro public goods funding for science. Any questions from the audience? Sue?
I can just speak loudly, it's okay. I'm curious, we looked at the Bitcoin ETF today. People started working on that 10 years ago, right? When the market cap of crypto was maybe 10%. What it is, so there was this vision to create this thing. It was going to take a long time to build. I'm curious from each of you, really simply, what's your distillation, what's your simplest conception of a vision of DAOs 10 years from now? And to the extent you can say that in a way that somebody who's not, I don't know, crypto native or technically minded, how would you explain it to them? Maybe within the context of I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. That's a long enough question.
I think, yeah, they'll be invisible for the most part, and people will be able to essentially do things together in collaborative ways that they don't even realize how this is happening under the hood. It's simply like communities are forming, communities are dissipating, using a sort of stack that's been proven out to think about the culture that works to keep them together. There's obviously going to be very big business cases of this. I mean, there's obviously things you could think about with like governmental, starting with municipalities and going up and thinking about DAOs that are based around people in a geographic location. Those are going to be much more powerful. Those are going to be much more successful in 10 years. And you can imagine essentially like a city, I think you might start with something like HOA organizations and then eventually small like network state, governance will sort of start to prove this out. I think probably by 10 years, that stuff will be in pretty good shape. I think it's going to be even longer before you actually like harvest or take over existing sovereigns as far as their governance and figuring out how to have stakeholders use a DAO to accomplish the things that representative democracy, mechanisms are currently doing, because there'll be a big fight about that for a long time. So I think in 10 years, we're starting to like have those fights seriously about like, how do you transform governance into something that actually does more directly reflect the interests of the stakeholders there. That's going to be probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. The Bitcoin ETF was in one place under one regulator. Crypto grew over that period of time because no one in the world could stop it. DAOs are natively Web3. They can't really be stopped, and so that will just continue. How the DAOs interact with the regulated worlds in the different jurisdictions will need to be figured out. But you're not going to be able to stop people from coordinating. So I think it will progress very fast, actually. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Can I ask one from up here? I found like the scarcest resource is like human attention and time, and there's so many different ways to spend your time these days, and I've seen DAOs getting kind of hijacked by the few people that have the time and energy to spend. How do you deal with that in a system that you want to be decentralized and have a lot of buy-in? How do you crack that nut? I've seen different ideas like optimistic voting.
Yeah, I agree with you that everyone wants to contribute to way more things than they can, and so a lot of people they get burnt out in DAO world because they're overdoing themselves. We need more people and more resources coming in, and then allowing for people to have slightly more focus. I mean, you can float about lots of different DAOs, or a lot of people will contribute to one or a few DAOs. The problem for that is there's so much opportunity, and we don't have enough people. This is still like a tiny little space. We need more people be able to commit full time to working, I think, in the decentralized world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. Right now, the answer I have for it is have much smaller DAOs and really be vigilant on essentially having that have a positive experience every time that DAO does anything together. Because essentially, I mentioned earlier the notion of homo economicus, this idea that human beings are motivated exclusively by rewards and risks, and that they will conduct themselves in a way that the incentives are drawing them. And that does not work in crypto. It's too distracting. People will lose interest. So you need to find something, and essentially culture and community are the two components there that seem like they're nice to haves, and they sometimes come across as a little bit woo-woo, but they really are the necessary component to have sustainability inside of a DAO. So that means that anytime somebody comes back into the DAO, it's legible to them, so they can see what's happening. So you need transparency, and it allows them to get the answers they need. And so the leaders inside these DAOs need to be thinking quite a bit about maintaining that sense of legibility, legitimacy, and they also need to really be thinking about, like, how do we make this work for the lazy, DAO contributor? How do we not sort of turn into this like specialist of high priests that are the ones that think about this stuff all day, and when you come back to a DAO 6 months later, it's an entirely different set of concerns, and there's new language they're using. So, I don't know the answer to this exactly, other than if you start small and you think about using the sub Dunbar's number, patterns that we have in our own built up evolutionary psychology, that's a really good clue about how people stay motivated. They care about other people. They care about communities that they feel a sense of meaning and understanding in. And so doing that for a larger DAO, a protocol DAO that goes on for a long time is a very, very difficult challenge. It's going to take some time to sort of put this together, but I think you got to think about this notion of culture and community as primary there, rather than just mechanism design.
And I think with that, we'll wrap this one up. Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you, Sky. Really appreciate it.